One of the things that I've learned in my short stay here so far in Montreal is that if anyone does not need an introduction here in Montreal, it is Rabbi Poupko. So therefore, I have very little to say. So this is our first installment. I've asked a number of local Rabbanim, as you know.
I'm the first guest?
You're the first guest, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I've asked a number of Rabbanim to speak. As you know, I think it's a really wonderful aspect of this course is to be able to learn from a wide range of teachers, instructors, Rabbanim. It's really a great thing. So we very much appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge of the Ramban with us. And lastly, tonight's class was sponsored by Anna and Joel Mendel in honor of their daughter Monica and son Dean for their ongoing outstanding work in the Montreal Jewish community. And so we appreciate very much your sponsorship. So if you enjoyed the cookies and nosh in the back, next week has not yet been sponsored. So please see me if you'd like to sponsor next week's lecture. Without any further ado, Rabbi Poupko. Do you want to stand?
I like to stand.
Give the microphone work down.
Is it okay? Good evening. Shusta Michael Dasa. Thank you, Rabbi Freundlich. We have about 70 minutes together to talk about the Ramban, otherwise known as Nachmanides, otherwise known as Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman. Where I see people in the room who have learned their whole lives, so I just want to say one note. One of the great, really unspoken of joys of learning is that from the time we're kids and from the time we are first exposed to Chumash and then Mishnah and Gemara, is that we open up books, we're taught great Torah from rabbis who have lived in every single century and in every single country in which Jews found themselves. And we grow up on semi-intimate terms with them. I mean, that's how we are. We grow up and we think we know Rashi. And we do. Because what better way is there to know Rashi than learning Rashi? And what better way is there to know the Ramban than studying Ramban? And what better way is there to know the Rambam than know the Rambam? Historians may tell us facts that we were unaware of if we spent all our time learning in yeshiva, but there is an intimacy that we have with the great rabbis of the past simply by learning them. And the majesty of learning is that you can sit in a room in Montreal, open a Gemara, and you're transported back in time. And you're opening up and you're reading about, you read Tanaim, the great rabbis of the Mishnah, and you're sitting in Israel with them. And you're sitting in the Galil, you're sitting in Tiberia, you're sitting in Yerushalayim with them, or in Bnei Brak. And you open up the Gemara and you're transported to Bavel, to Babylonia, and you're sitting with Ravina Rashi. And you're sitting with the great scholars of the Talmud period. And you're sitting with the Gaonim of the next generation, of the Rishonim, the early medieval commentators. You're sitting in France with Rashi. You're sitting in Spain with the Ramban. And we know them all. I mean, this is who we are connected to. And then you keep learning. You learn Halacha. You learn the Ramban. You're in Krakow in the 15th century. Or you're learning at Beis Yosef. And you're in Svat and Eretz Yisrael. I mean, there's this remarkable power that Torah has to break down all barriers of time and space. We know these people well, and we've always studied them. This is how we've always lived. This is the world in which we all come from, the world that we were surrounded by these names and by their books and by their works. This is just how we lived. We lived in the cocoon of Torah, and the Ramban is somebody we all know or should know. The Ramban is someone who's, those of who are steeped in learning, a Shabbos doesn't go by when you don't quote or hear a Ramban. If you learn Gemara on a regular basis, you don't go a blot or two, even if you're learning in a superficial way, without having to confront the Ramban as you do a Rashba, a Ritva, a Rashi, and a Taisvus. You have to. I mean, these are the people who made up the intellectual foundation that we all live with, and the Ramban is a stellar personality, and he needs to be discussed. You were all in Yerushalayim. You were all in the Ramban Shul, right? You've all been there, and that story itself is a story that could take the entire evening. The story of the Ramban in Israel, which is only the last couple of years of his life. The Ramban was born in 1194. He dies in 1270. He only gets to Israel the last handful of years of his life. And from that shul, which was built exactly 700 years before the Six-Day War, in the year 1267, the last couple of years of his life, that which he established remained intact till 1948. And that shul, that's a remarkable thing. The first time, I mean, you've all been in Rechavia, right? Rechavia is a great neighborhood because that's the great thing about streets. I have this theory about car accidents in Israel. People think people have car accidents in Israel because Israelis drive aggressively. I think they're distracted by street names. No. I mean, how do you not have an accident when Rehov Begin crosses Jabotinsky? I mean, you get all excited. And then Bialik crosses Acharam. I mean, you start thinking about this. You think about, you drive in Rechavia, you hit the Ramban, you hit Rehov Ramban, and then you hit Ushishkin. It's confusing. So I'm convinced if they had named their streets for trees, like elm and oak, there'd be many less accidents. That's my theory. Anyway, but if you're on, when I was a kid, the first time I went to Israel was 1968. We had an apartment in Rehov Ramban, 39, for 4 weeks on Rehov Ramban. I mean, it's a great street in Rechavia, but he's there for a reason, not just because he's a Rishon, but he was the builder of Jerusalem. Years before, centuries before, it became fashionable. And then, of course, with the Ramban, not only do you have to discuss his move to Israel at the end of his life, not only do you have to try to discuss his contribution to the study of Chumash and the study of Gemara, and not only do you have to discuss his philosophy about learning, his philosophy about rabbinic authority, his philosophy about philosophy in terms of his thoughts of the Rambam, but you also have to discuss what is probably the most popular known part of his life, which is the great vikuach that takes place, the disputations, the debate he is forced to have to defend Judaism in the court of King James I of Aragon in July in the early part of the 1260s, and that's what happens in 1264, where he's forced to defend the name of the Jewish people, and the vikuach, the famous vikuach. Some of you may remember watching it on TV in 1986. A British station produced something called The Disputation, which was also shown on American TV. I do not remember who played the Ramban. I don't remember. I don't know. It wasn't Paul Newman. That's all I remember. But it was shown on TV. Chaim Maccabee wrote a play based on the vikuach. It was a wonderful book. Everyone should read it, based on the great vikuach that takes place. It's also available on Amazon. You can buy it. It's in the original. This is Rabbi Chevel's translation of The Disputation in Barcelona, and you can get it. It's very cheap. It's also very thin. It doesn't cost a lot. It's a lot of fun to read. It's useful at all your debates. Anyway, let's get down to business. I chose first, it's very hard to pick and select Ramban because there's such a vast amount, but one of the more famous positions that he took was a position that he took in opposition to the Rambam. Now, and here's the thing about, whenever you discuss the Ramban and the Rambam, people always emphasize that which separated them. And the debate we're going to see right now in text number 1, you forgive, the numbers are very small, but the number 1 is easy to find because it's first, is about malachim, is about angels. But keep in mind, as you read, as we go through this very strong debate, and the Ramban uses very strong words in his debate with the Rambam about angels. Remember something, the Ramban is 10 years old when the Rambam dies. Oh, is that camera? Do I have to stand in one place?
Impossible. Not possible.
It's good. I can torment the people watching. It's fun. Like, I'll pop in and out. All right. All right. Who would watch? Anyway, one of the things to keep in mind about the Ramban and the Rambam is fascinating. The Ramban uses very tough words when he disputes the Rambam on this issue that we're going to see in a minute. Keep in mind that when push came to shove, and that's literal, when push came to shove, you remember the Rambam was a source of great dispute. Rabbi Forman, when are you doing the Rambam?
The Rambam is going to be in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. You'll hear in a couple of weeks about the Rambam that the Rambam's works were controversial. I mean, there were times when the Rambam's works were burnt, when they were banned, it was one time he was called to reconcile a dispute. There was a rabbi who had been excommunicated from his community because he was anti-Maimonides, he was anti-Rambam. And he went to the Ramban for help on this. And the Ramban tried to make peace, where he stridently defended the Rambam, even though, again, he's helping a guy who's anti-Rambam. As part of his reconciliation, there are writings of the Ramban strenuously defending the Rambam, and he tried to make a compromise, which, again, as you know with the Jewish people, is not always simple. And the compromise, he said, is, listen, the Mishnah Torah is the Mishnah Torah, right? The works of law that the Rambam wrote need to be respected. And he praised them for being strict according to halach and everything else. And then he maintained that the Moreh Nevuchim, the more controversial work, the Guide for the Perplexed, was written not for the Hamonam, not for everyone. It was written for those Jews who had been seduced away from traditional thinking by the philosophy of Aristotle and others. And the purpose of the Rambam writing the Moreh Nevuchim, says the Ramban, was to bring back the Jews who had already embraced non-Jewish philosophy. And the Moreh Nevuchim was his way to do that. Now, you can debate that theory of why the Rambam wrote it, but that's how the Ramban understood it. And he tried to sell this compromise to the community. We, embrace the Mishnah Torah, right? Set aside the Moreh Nevuchim, embrace that, and on those grounds make peace. And he praised the Rambam effusively. I mean, in the most humble of terms. But each side rejected the compromise of the dispute, and the dispute continued on. And in 2 weeks, you'll hear more about what happens with the Rambam and some of the terrible repercussions of that debate. But here we have a very interesting debate, number one. I picked this because I thought it would be more relevant to the Parshios, but we're delayed a week, but you'll have to go back a couple of weeks in the Parshas. You all remember Parshas Vayera, which we read 2 weeks ago in Shul, where the opening sequence of Psukim describe how Avram Avinu is sitting, at the doorway of his tent. And he's approached by three, who approaches him? Tell me. Three who? Angels, right? 3 angels come. Okay. Now, this is a real problem, because the Rambam has a iconoclastic opinion that there are no such thing as angels in real life. And the Rambam believes strongly that every time an angel is talked about in the Torah, it means a prophetic vision. It means a nevuah, right? It doesn't mean you see an angel, it means it's a prophetic vision of an angel, which is a not so subtle distinction. It may sound subtle, but it's not. It means you're in a dream state. It's not a conscious state, according to the Rambam. You do not see angels in a conscious state. Now, give me a good question why the Rambam maybe, if you're fighting with the Rambam, give me a good reason why the Rambam is wrong. Which are words the Ramban himself actually used worse words. Anyway, but give me a story with an angel that doesn't make sense if it's only a dream. Yaakov, right? How does Yaakov limp? Right? It seems pretty conscious, right? Yaakov wrestles with an angel, and he walks away with sciatica, right? Some of you are intimately familiar. And so he walks away and he's injured. So the Rambam has to explain, that things that happen in subconscious state can also leave physical impact, right? But again, it's a hard position to maintain with consistency throughout all the examples of the time that Malachim appear. The story with the donkey, right? With Bilam, right? That's a story that has to now be a dream. I mean, it's a difficult position to maintain. So, but the Rambam believes that. Rambam believes there are no such thing as angels. That every angel in real life, it's only in a prophetic state that there are angels. So, I gave you text number 1, which is the text of the Moreh Nevuchim. We can go right to the English to keep life easy. This important principle was adopted by one of our sages, one of the most distinguished among them, Rabbi the Great, etc. In the exposition of the scriptural passages, the Lord appeared unto him in the plain of Mamre. The general statement that the Lord appeared to Abraham is followed. Remember, the Rambam is going to argue that the pasuk begins, Vayera Lav Hashem. God appeared to him. Then In that prophetic vision, you have angels. So that's a prologue to the prophecy. The general statement that Lord, the general statement that the Lord appeared to him is followed by the description and what manner the appearance of God, the Lord, took place. Namely, Abraham saw first 3 men. He ran and spoke to them. The author of explanation holds that the words of Abraham, my Lord, if I now have spoken and found grace in thy eyes, do not, I pray, pass thee from thy servant. You all recognize this pasuk, were spoken by him in a prophetic vision to one of the men. For he says that Abraham addressed these words to the chief of these men. Note this well, for it is one of the great mysteries of the law, that the same I hold is the case when it is said in reference to Jacob, and a man wrestled with him. This took place in a prophetic vision, since expressly it stated in the end that this was an angel. The circumstances are here exactly the same as those in the vision of Abraham, where the general statement of the Lord appeared to him is followed by a detailed description, meaning of the prophetic vision. Similarly, the account of the vision of Jacob and the angels of God met him, right? And then followed a detailed description of how it came to pass that they met him, etc., the messengers and everything else. But then he goes on to say, now, go to page 2. Go to page 2. And you see text number 2 there at the top? There's a little number 2. Did we mess up the order?
No, what happened was I gave your sheets, they were double-sided. I think the person who helped me photocopy them hit the wrong button.
I'm so happy this isn't my fault. I have rarely been this happy. Because these are the kinds of things I usually do wrong.
You're missing this, yeah.
So what page is it?
They're missing every other sheet.
You're missing every other sheet.
1, 3, and 5.
That should be fun.
Good luck.
I can make stuff up now.
You want me to, I'll run them up now.
No, don't bother. It's okay. Do you trust me to read it to you? Yes. All right, good. I will read you. I'm going to give it to Hoodie to read. I have a volunteer from the audience. All right, I'll read it. The Ramban on Bereshis, and this I didn't translate because I didn't want to translate it. I just recited it in the Hebrew. Ve'ele devarim. This is the Rambam. I'm sorry, the Ramban, directly criticizing the Rambam. The Ramban writes, and you can look it up. It's on Perik Yudchet Posuk Aleph on Bereshis. Ve'ele devarim sotrim hakatuv. These words contradict the Torah. Osir l'shomam. You can't listen to them. Afki lamimim. You can't believe them. I mean, these are pretty strong words. He says these are. He says they contradict the Torah, and it's forbidden to hear these words, or certainly not to believe in them. That's the Ramban. I mean, his critique is much lengthier than that. He goes through each proof and he goes through the whole story. But the Ramban strenuously attacks the Rambam on this. And then when you know his biography, it's very interesting. When you know his biography, how much he defended the Rambam when the Rambam himself was criticized by others, it's a remarkable thing. I mean, the idea, it's a shocking idea, especially in our time. Tomorrow is the midterm elections. You can disagree with somebody and still respect them. And that's a remarkable thing, because the Ramban is very critical of the Rambam here, very critical. But other parts of his life, he strenuously defends his reputation and his place in the canon, right, in Jewish intellectual legitimacy. He accepts him 100%. But he is sharply critical when he feels the Rambam has gone too far. And he says, again, I'll repeat it, Ve'ele dvarim sotrim hakatuv. These things contradict the verse. Asar l'shomam. You can't hear them, you can't teach them, you can't believe them, nothing. That's a pretty strong Ramban. I mean, it doesn't get tougher than that. And the other irony is that as critical as he was of the Rambam for writing this about the questioning the existence of angels, the Ramban himself began his career. How does he begin his career? What's the first thing he writes? Those of you who have studied Gemara first came across the Ramban, not in the Chedushay Ramban, not in the writings of the Ramban on Gemara, but in the back of the Gemara. The back of the Gemara, there's something called Mechavas Hashem, right? Which is back in this part of the Rif. Okay, the Gemaras are big books, you know, at the back, all the way in the back where the letters get smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, all the way in the back. There's the Rif, right? That's Rabbeinu Alfasi, who edited down the Gemara to the halachic decisions. Okay, so you have the Rif, the great Sephardic halachic mind of Rabbeinu Alfasi. A commentary on the Rif is a gentleman who lived a generation before the Ramban named the Baal HaMaor. The Baal HaMaor writes a work very critical of the Rif. very critical of the Rif. The Ramban's first thing that he writes it when he's 16 years old, is a book called Milchemas Hashem, right? Which is the wars of God. Now, when other people have wars of God, they blow things up. When we have wars of God, we break things. And the Ramban writes the Milchemas Hashem for one reason only, to defend the Rif from the Balamar. Right, that's all he does in the back, on the back pages of the Gemara, right, where that you study when you're in yeshiva. The first time you confront him is when the Ramban spends an entire work simply defending the honor of Rabbeinu Alfasi from the critique of this other rabbi, the Balamar, who was not a contemporary, lived a generation before him. That's the Ramban, and then he writes over and over again about he was really, I think, I would venture to say, with some fear of contradiction, that he was the first one to assert the need for one generation of Jews and scholars to respect the absolute authority of the decisions of the previous generation. You know, if you went to yeshiva, you always heard if you're an Acharon, you don't argue with the Rishon. If you're a Rishon, you don't argue with the Goyinim, and the Goyinim don't argue with the Amoraim, and the Amoraim don't argue with the Tanaim. They're the generations of scholarship coming from the Mishnah down to our time. The Ramban was the first one to say this. He says, we cannot argue with the Goyinim, right, the rabbis of the previous generation. Not only that, we cannot argue with the students of the Goyinim. He went even further. Then he said, not only can we not argue with them, he says, even if we can't understand what they're saying, we have to assume that they're right. Now, there are those who now, there are always other people come around, well, what was it? Why did he do this? Why was he so strict on rabbinic authority? Some say it was a not so subtle reproach to the Rambam, who was creative to the point where he did strike a distinct posture from previous generations, that it was really an attack on the Rambam. Others say, no, it's not true. It wasn't a response to the Rambam. It was simply the way he understood the demands and the architecture of Jewish intellectual life, which is that one generation accepts the opinions of the earlier one, and we build upon them. We don't reject them, not just generally speaking, but overwhelmingly. And the Ramban was the one who really, I believe, is the first one to really put this in print, that we do not assume the hubris of being able to, of going back a generation. I mean, there are a few exceptions. There are exceptions to this, but they're few and far between. And that one generation does not argue on a previous generation. The Vilna Gaon was one of the few who had a license to do that. No one else really. I can think of offhand. No, we don't argue with previous generations, and because truth is we hardly have enough time to argue with the people in our generation. So it would be too distracting. Anyway, so we tend to accept the opinions of a previous generation, and the Ramban was very strict on that. But and he stood up for rabbinic honor. He stood up for the Rambam when he was being criticized, even though he was long gone from the world at the time. And he stands up. He writes a whole book to defend the Rif from the critique of the Balamar. He was very strict on this. But when it came to speaking what he had to say about the truth, that he was not hesitant. When the Rambam veers from traditional Jewish thinking about how to read a page of Chumash, right, what the Malachim mean, who are the Malachim, he couldn't tolerate it. And he says it's forbidden words. He says he wouldn't accept it. All right, now I'm sorry you don't have the page. All right, just to give you a couple of other examples of how the Ramban understood Chumash. You all know the story, that strange, sometimes difficult to explain story about how Avram, on more than one occasion, introduces his wife as his sister. You know this thing? Right, Imrina Chosiyat, right? And then Yitzchak does it also later, right? Right, he has this, right? I'm not going to get into that story at all, but listen to the Ramban. I'm going to read you the Ramban only in English. Okay, let me read you the Ramban. What does the Ramban say about the behavior here? Oh, also, one other thing in that story. What's the first time Abraham says to Sarah, tell him you're my sister? When does that happen? Right at the beginning of Lech Lecha, right? When they, after a few psukim, right? God tells him, go to Israel. He goes to Israel, there's a famine, and he immediately goes to Egypt, right? He checks out right away. So listen to what Ramban says. You talk about, how he defends the honor. I just told you how he defends the Rambam, how he defends the Rif, right? And he, listen to what he says about, in Chumash though. He says, V'da, Ki Avraham Avinu chata chet gadol, that Abraham, our father, unintentionally committed a great sin, bishkaga. Shehevi ishto hatzedekis b'michshal avon b'bnei pachdoi pen yaharguhu. That he brought his wife, he committed a great sin, bishkaga, unintentionally, that he brought his righteous wife, right, into a stumbling block of sin because he was afraid for his life, right? He was afraid that if he said his wife, they would kill him to get to her. V'hayalo liftoach b'shem. He should have had faith in God that he would be saved. And he shouldn't go around putting his wife in danger by saying she's unattached. That God has the power to save and protect and save him. And then he goes further, the Ramban. Also the fact that he abandoned the land of Israel, writes the Ramban. He was obligated to go on Aliyah, right? God tells him, go to Israel. Then run out of shawarma, and he runs right to Egypt, right? I don't know if we're shawarma. Anyway, he runs right away, but they are right? Because of the famine. Right? He says, what are you doing running away from Israel? And listen to this. Listen to how far the Ramban goes. He says, because Avram Avinu, the first Jew, leaves Israel at the site of famine, because of this, says the Ramban, this you won't find anywhere else. Because of this, the Jewish people were punished with exile in Egypt and slavery in Egypt because Abraham left Israel in a time of famine. That's the Ramban. None of us in the room would have the arrogance to say such a thing. I promise you that. So the same Ramban, right, who is very defensive of rabbinic authority, has no qualms about calling him as he sees him when he's writing on Chumash, even about Avram Avinu. And he says Avram Avinu, he did a great sin, bishkaga, unintentionally. But then the other sin, he doesn't say is bishkaga, intentional, leaving Israel, and he claims that the repercussions are slavery in Egypt itself for Avram having left Egypt. I mean, so we're not talking about somebody who was always handcuffed by tradition. The next Ramban. This one you're going to enjoy more, I think. You may remember the story. Also, again, I chose these because they were what we're reading now. But you can find, revolutionary Rambans in any parsha. You remember when Avram Avinu marries Hagar, right? And because that was Sarah's initiative, and then Sarah seems to regret it. And then what happens is, once she gets pregnant, Sarah begins to oppress her. Okay, and listen to this. Our mother Sarah, this is the Ramban. Chata imenu be'inoi hazeh. Our mother Sarah sinned when she was mean to Hagar. This is the Ramban, the simple Ramban on Chumash. V'gam Avraham banicho lasos came. Avram also sinned by letting her do it. So remember, this is to you men out there. When you let your women be mean, it's your fault. Chata imenu be'inoi hazeh. V'gam Avraham banicho lasos came. That's why God listens to Hagar. Remember, Hagar's out there in the field, right? And she's upset, and the Malach saves her. The whole thing tells her to go back, and etc. And then the Ramban goes on to say, I mean, this is really remarkable. Are they getting, what sheet are you looking at?
They're getting the evens.
You already have sheets 1, 3, and 5.
Oh, good. So right now I'm looking at number 4 on this page. So I read to you text number 3 and 4 just recently. And the text number 3 was the one about how the Ramban seems to be critical of Abraham's choice to leave Israel and to introduce his wife as his sister. That was text number 3. And now in text number 4, the Ramban is being critical again, this time of the behavior of Sarah for oppressing Hagar when she becomes pregnant, and criticizing Avraham for letting her do this. And just as in text number 3, the Ramban says there was a consequence. In text number 3, the consequence was Avraham leaves Israel willingly. His children are going to be exiled because of that in Egypt. In text number 4, the Ramban claims the repercussion is that because Hagar is victimized by Sarah and Avraham doesn't intervene, what happens? Then that's why she has a kid named Yishmael, who is a source of an irritant to the Jews later on. And that's what the Ramban says about the behavior of Avram and Sarah as it relates to Hagar. Now, These are quite astonishing Rambans. By the way, I just want to tell you something. The Ramban is not easy to learn on Chumash. He's not. There are a lot of easier people to learn. The Ramban, you have to take time and patience. It's not the easiest thing to learn. But he's been translated twice now that I'm aware of. The Rabbi Chevelle did a great work translating the Ramban. But I have to compliment Art Scroll. They did a fantastic job recently. They just put out an English Ramban. It really is it's really a wonderful work. They go to great lengths. There's only one problem with the Art Scroll version, which I don't mind that much, but others would find problematic. And I'm not going to discuss it at all tonight. Is that the Ramban on Chumash can have very normal interpretations like this, right? Like you find, things that are accessible and logical and reasonable. But then he also has a lot of Kabbalah in there. And he has a lot of different versions of the following statement. I think I'll show you one a little bit later, where he says, V'amevin Yavin, where he talks Kabbalistically about things, and which are not easy to understand. Our scroll is very cautious about teaching Kabbalah to the uninitiated, and therefore whenever he hits Kabbalah, you'll get a censor note, kind of, from our scroll, which says, the next portion is Kabbalah, we will not translate it. You see a lot of this in the English Ramban, which is probably wise, because I don't think the translation of Kabbalah actually helps you understand Kabbalah, but the Ramban, and that's part of the story I'm not going to get to tonight, is a Mekupel. The Ramban is a possessor of one strain of Kabbalistic literature, and although people think they understand Kabbalah and teach Kabbalah, they even pronounce it Kabbalah, which is probably a hint that they don't know what it is. The Ramban is filled with Kabbalah. There's a lot of Kabbalah there that is hard to understand. I'm only going to show you one very small example later, but if you've ever studied Ramban on Chumash, you don't have to go very far in the Ramban to find a portion where he explains something or doesn't explain something and then say, Amevin Yavin or Yaskil, right? It means if those who know. Those who understand this, and then is less than clear on less than clear on what he wants to say. Anyway, those are just a couple of Rambans on Chumash. I thought I'd show you a Ramban on Gemara as well. This one is not translated, because no one ever translated the Ramban, and I wasn't going to, on Gemara. Now, the reason I mention this one is because it kind of follows on the Ramban on number 3. One thing about the Ramban that we'll see in a couple of places is his enormous love for Israel, which I alluded to earlier when after the Vikuach, after the disputation in Barcelona, he has to escape and he finds refuge in Israel. He had a great passionate love for Israel, and it comes up later in another argument he has with the Rambam. And we'll see that in a minute. But listen to this Ramban on Shabbos. Number 5, the text at the bottom of that page. Even though generally speaking, telling a Gentile to work for you on Shabbos is forbidden, says the Ramban, Mishuv Eretz, Mishuv Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, like Rabbi. He says if it contributes to the building of Israel, you're allowed to tell a non-Jew what to do for you on Shabbos. It's fascinating psak of the Ramban. That means to build the land of Israel, you're allowed to tell a non-Jew to work for you. It's very interesting. Mishum Yishuv Eretz Yisrael like Rabbanan. Because the settlement of the land of Israel, the rabbis did not decree this. When it comes to Israel, you're okay. If you lost malacha, the board malka mitzvah like Rabbanan, if it's a mitzvah, the rabbis didn't decree in general when it's a mitzvah. Now the kashal midi das a mitzvah to elis l'chol Yisrael. And he says, but here it's even more compelling because not only is it a mitzvah, he describes this tayelis l'chol Yisrael. It's a purpose for all of the Jewish people to build Israel, right? Shalot techrav eretz kedusha, that the land of the Holy Land shouldn't be in disrepair. That means to build the land of Israel, you're allowed to do this. It's not only a mitzvah, he calls it something which is toyelis, the public agenda. It's a toyelis l'chol Yisrael. It's for the purpose of all of Israel. And that's why the building of the land of Israel supersedes the normal restrictions on instructing Gentiles to work on Shabbos, because it has to do with the building of the land of Israel. Now, if you can find text number 6, I think that might be in the binder. Page number 3 is in the binder. So look for text number 6. This is a kind of a mystical Ramban. That's why I chose it, but it was also about Israel, so that's another reason I put it here. I don't know if we have to do the Hebrew. Let's just do the English. And he placed over each and every people in their lands, according to their nations, a star and a specific constellation, as is known in astrology. It means what he's saying is that every people on the earth has a kind of spiritual or astrological representation on high. And behold, the honored God is the God power of powers, the master of masters of the whole universe. But upon the land of Israel, where am I? At the center of the world's habitation, the inheritance of God that is unique to his name, he did not place a captain, an officer, or a ruler from the angels. In his giving it as an inheritance to his nation that unifies his name, the seed of his beloved one. Meaning, God doesn't, there's no delegation of authority over the Jewish people or over the land of Israel. It is direct command. Direct, unfiltered, it is God and God himself. Everybody else has a delegate, everybody else has a representative, everyone else has an intermediary. We and the land of Israel, the Jewish people and the land of Israel, have an unmediated relationship with God. There's no one in between. It is direct and complete. And that's how that's one of the ways he understands or explains that relationship. We're going to see some other texts later about Israel, but I wanted to take a bit of I'm not sure why I did it in this order, but anyway, you'll see. This one was on again on Parshat Vayera. This is actually I copied this from the article because it was easy. And number 7, just on the test of Avram. Now here's the question. It's a test. Those of you who are older than me, or even a little younger than me, remember the days when you used to turn on TV, if you lived in America, and you'd get this notice, this is a test, only a test, don't panic. Who remembers that? Okay, you're all in Social Security. Okay, now, if you remember that message on TV, remember that? Okay, this is a test. They had it in Canada also? Sunday morning. Yeah? This is a test. All right, you're not supposed to freak out, right? You were hiding from the Russians. And so the story of the Akedah, which is a very interesting story, obviously. The story of the Akedah, begins with the words, Va'elokim nisas Avraham. Right? And God tests Avraham. So if you come from Mars and you've never heard the story before, and you pick up a Chumash and you start reading the 22nd chapter of Bereshis, and it begins with the words, and God tested Avraham, you know right away that Yitzchak lives, by the way. There's no suspense in the story, because it says it's a test. We're told right away it's a test. Avraham did not know that, according to 99.9% of understandings of the Akedah, but we should know that. That means we're not living in suspense. That means if you're a 7-year-old kid and Cheder for the first time learning about a father who's told to kill his kid, you shouldn't worry, because it's a test. You know it's a test, no father's going to hurt his kid, don't worry, everyone lives. Now, so the question is, what's the purpose of the test? All right, what's the reason for the test? By the way, I saw an interpretation, maybe I shouldn't mention this. I saw something, I got an email from my son in California, he's a rabbi out in Palo Alto. My son sent me an email, not this past Erev Shabbos a week ago. He says to me, he sends me an email, he attaches a Meshech Chochmah, and he says to me, like angry, Daddy, why did we never see this Meshech Chochmah before? It's not a bad email to get from your kid. Why did we never see this Meshech Chochmah? So I opened the Meshech, you all know who Meshech Chochmah was, Rameir Simcha Devinsk, right? An extraordinary modern day, because only a little, 100 years ago, interpreter of Chumash. Did you ever see the Meshech Chochmah on the Akedah? The Meshech Chochmah says something astonishing on the Akedah, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about tonight, but it's in my head, so I'm sharing it with you. The Meshech Chochmah says the following. Why is there an Akedah? Why is Abraham told to kill his son? He says, look at what happens after the Akedah. It says what? Yirash sar oivav. You will inherit your enemies, right? You're going to beat your enemies, it says, right? Because you listened, because right after the Akedah, you will now vanquish your enemies. Says the Meshech Chochmah, to vanquish your enemies, you got to be tough. And the Akedah happens to teach Avraham and the Jewish people how to be tough. Because if you're not going to be able to pick up a knife you're not going to be able to beat your enemies. It's to toughen us up. It's an astonishing, and he uses stronger language than that, but I won't mention it. He says you have to be an achzer sometimes to beat your enemies. He says it never becomes an intrinsic character of the Jewish people, but we have to know how to be tough. And if you want to beat your enemies, you've got to be tough. That's what the Meshech Chochmah wrote. Very interesting. It's an astonishing Meshech Chochmah. So my son was rightfully angry when he said to me why he had never seen this before, because it really is an astonishing Meshech Chochmah. You know, I was talking about this. I just want to tell you a story about the Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah, this is something every Jew should know, because you meet a lot of people who have wrong ideas about things. The Meshech Chochmah was also a great Zionist, betraying the depiction of every rabbi in Eastern Europe as being an anti-Zionist. Meshech Chochmah was a great Zionist. They came to the Meshech Chochmah once, a Jew who had just visited Palestine in those days. Meshech Chochmah lived around the turn of from the 19th to 20th century, and came to the Meshech Chochmah, and they complained that none of the Jews in Israel are religious. He had come back from Palestine. You know what the Meshech Chochmah answered? Who knows Yiddish here? All right, I'll translate. The Meshech Chochmah says, he got very angry at the guy. He says, "Vos sagt man wegen Kudsche Brichu? Yiskadal v'yiskadash. Erstens darf das sein Grace und noch dem Heilig." It's an unbelievable thing. He said, what do we say about God? Yit gadal v'yit gadash. Let God be great and God be holy. The same thing with the land of Israel. Let it be great. Then worry about it being holy. It's an unbelievable thing. He said, "Erstens darf das sein Grace." First, let it be big. Then let it be holy. Anyway, it's an unbelievable. I mean, it's astonishing. Anyway, but so the Ramban here. Let's get back to the Ramban. The Ramban here wants to know about what the purpose of the test is. Follow me in number 7. But we should give all the classes in Yiddish, I think. We'd have a much bigger crowd.
I would have the whole semester off.
All right. Inyan Hanisayin Huladaiti, what is the reason? I'll read their English. Why don't I make it my own English? Is my opinion how we should understand the matter of God subjecting a person to a test. Whereas a person's actions are complete within his control, we have absolute free choice. If he wants to do a certain act, he'll do it. If he doesn't want to do it, he will not. God's command to a particular person is called a test from the point of view of the tested party, obviously. But the tester, meaning God, but the tester, blessed be, he commands the tested party to perform a certain act in order to bring forth the matter of a person's righteousness from potential to the actual. So that the tested should have the reward not only of a good thought, but of a good heart, but of a good deed. In other words, it's to bring to the actual from the realm of the potentials, for the benefit of the one being tested. And then he, all right. And then he goes on. V'daki Hashem, look at the bottom after the parentheses. V'daki Hashem tzadik yivchan. You should know that Hashem examines only the righteous man. When he knows about a righteous person, that he will in fact pass the test, meaning fulfill his will, and he wants to grant him merit, he commands him some difficult act as a test. But he doesn't bother testing evil people who aren't going to listen anyway. All tests in the Torah are for the benefit of the tested, and I didn't write the rest of the translation because it speaks for itself. Anyway, that's how he understands the Akeda, that it is for the benefit of Avraham Avinu. All right, where am I now? I did how many pages? 1, 2. I'm all mixed up now. Oh, here I am. 8. Yes. Okay. All right. One of the other great debates. We're on page 4. I know that doesn't help you, but page 4 is is not in your binder. Page 4 was just handed to you. Look for the little scrawled number 8 and number 9, 10, and 11. There's a page with an 8, 9, 10, and 11 in the margin. One of the other arguments is I just want to make sure everyone's having in the future. All right. Is the Ramban's opinion on the mitzvah to live in Israel. Oh, yes, that's right. I have another sheet here for my own. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, the Ramban in the Vayikra, number 8 in the text. Ki ikar kol ha-mitzvahs liyoshvim be'eretz Yisrael. Be'eretz Hashem, I'm sorry. The essence of all of the commandments are for those dwelling in the land of the Lord. Now, this is a radical, radical statement. That means we know that the majority of mitzvos are in fact connected to the land of Israel. If you add up the 613 mitzvahs that we have and you look through the list, the majority of them do not apply in a world without a Beit HaMikdash, in a world where we're living outside of Israel. That's the reality. Most of the mitzvot have to do with sacrifices and agriculture in the land of Israel and the Beit HaMikdash. So the majority are certainly only in Israel. But he goes further than that here. He goes further and he says that the essence of all mitzvos, even Shabbos and kosher, all mitzvos, the essence of all mitzvos are for people living in Israel. Okay, there are those who interpret this, and he says something like this, similar, that the only reason we observe Torah outside of Israel is so that we should be able to do it when we get back home. Right, that in fact Torah is, I can't even, primarily is not even strong enough word. I can't use the word exclusively because it sounds like you're not supposed to keep kosher tonight. But it's pretty much almost exclusively that the Torah is given for Israel. And that everything we do in Torah and mitzvahs outside of Israel, this is a radical opinion. I mean, this is not something you'll find in many others. He bases it on a Sifri, by the way. It's not his idea. That the purpose of keeping mitzvot outside the land of Israel is to be able to do them once we get back home. I mean, the Ramban says that. And Lefikach Amr B'Sifri V'Rashi Moshe V'Shatam V'Shmartam Lasos Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael Shkula Connected Kol Mitzvah Shem Torah, right? Living in the land of Israel. That's a statement you've heard others make. Is equal to all the other mitzvos living in the land of Israel. And another Ramban, I mean, there's several Rambans that allude to this and say it less explicitly or more explicitly. He has in this he argues with the Rambam. The Ramban believes there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael today. The Ramban believes there's a mitzvah to go and live in Israel today. The Rambam does not seem to have agreed with that. The Ramban believes that there is a 100% a mitzvah to live in Israel. By the way, both the Ramban and the Rambam end up in Israel, but the Ramban believed it was the fulfillment of a mitzvah. But I'll get to that in a minute. So the first, I'll give you this. I'm going to read you something I didn't give to you. This is something I have in my hands. Virashtem oisav yeshavtem bebeschush shetirash teishev al teshor zatomek mitzvah hi mitzvah b'machem shev amim v'shenestav olavdam. Don't think that this whole mitzvah of inheriting the land and settling the land is only at the beginning of Jewish history in Israel, when we have to conquer the other nations who are living there in the time of Yoshua and later. Don't think it's a mitzvah for only then. It's a mitzvah all the time to move to Israel. He goes on and on. Now, I don't know what to do first. Should I do some more stuff on Israel? Okay, let me talk about Israel first, then we'll do the Vikuach at the end, although it's out of chronological order. Once we're on Israel, we'll continue. He ends up moving to Israel for the last 7 years of his life, as I mentioned. And I mentioned this earlier about how he builds the shul. Where is he buried? Anyone know where the Ramban is buried? Have you ever been taken to the grave of the Ramban? Has anyone ever seen the grave of the Ramban? Why not? He's buried in Israel.
Where? Very. No.
Okay. It's very strange. It's very strange because, by the way, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of graves in Israel. And a lot of rabbis have graves there. And there's a lot of famous graves. You go to Taveri, it's the Rambam, right? It's always a lot of nice. Where's the Ramban's grave? We don't know. There is a grave in Taveri that has his name on it. Most do not believe it's his. When he went to Israel, the only settled place was Akko. Because Akko was in control. The rest of Israel was destroyed. I'll read you a letter the Ramban writes to his son upon seeing Israel and what he writes back. But the Ramban gets to Israel in the latter part of the 13th century. There had just been the wars. The Crusaders had just gotten rid of the Muslims. It was the country ravaged. Terrible. And Akko was a civilized place. Akko was like the only civilized place. Akko is not Israel. biblical Israel, right? Akko is over the border. If you know the biblical map of Israel. So according to most, I hate to say most, many authorities, when the Ramban died in Akko, where he died, he was buried in what is now an Arab village called Kfar Yassif, where many other Jews from Akko were buried in the 13th century. These are unmarked graves. There are no graves there. We don't know where he's buried. We really don't. There are stories of him having been buried in Tveria. There's a story about him being buried in Yerushalayim. But I know nobody's ever rarely taken to a grave and said, that's the Ramban. And it's very interesting. He dies in Israel, but we don't know where his grave is. It's a very tragic story in a way. Most people believe, I don't know, most may be a strong word, but the mainstream thinking amongst historians is that he was buried in what's now an Arab village called Kfar Yassif. He's an unknown, unmarked grave. It's a disaster, really. And he loved Israel. I mean, as you see, I mean, to make a statement that all of Torah is for Israel, not just the mitzvahs linked to the land of Israel, that everything we do outside of Israel is only to be able to do it in Israel, and to continue to maintain as others do, but he did so strenuously and put into practice in his life that it's a constant mitzvah to live in Israel, and yet he goes and he lives and he's buried there and we don't know where it is. It's certainly sad. Just a couple of the notes. So he goes to Akko, he gets off the boat, he goes to Akko after Barcelona, after he goes to Catalan, he goes to Barcelona, and there's nothing there. I mean, very little land of Israel. I'll read you what he wrote to his son. Let me make sure I don't run out of time here. He writes to his son. This is a letter to his son. So what can I tell you about the land of Israel? You don't have this text, I'm sorry. The abandonment and destruction is great. Yerushalayim yotercha cheva min hakol. Jerusalem is more destroyed than anything else. The Eretz Yehuda Yosem and I keep going back and forth. I was raised Ashkenazi, sorry. The Eretz Yehuda, I'll just keep going like I'm normal. The Eretz Yehuda Yosem and Galil, and in the land of Judea worse than the Galil. The Am Kol V'im Kol Chorbanahi Tovim Mahod. It's a beautiful thing. With all of its destruction, it's a great place. I mean, this is only a Jew could write like this. He writes about Yerushalayim, only 2,000 people live in Yerushalayim. Not 2,000 Jews, 2,000 people in Yerushalayim. The Notzrim Betocham Kishleishmeas, the 300 Christians there. Plite Mecherev HaSultan, right? Refugees from the sword of the Sultan. The Ein Yisrael Betocho, there are no Jews there, he writes. Very few Jews there. He'll write in a minute. Ki Me'es Bo HaTetrim. Who are the Tetrim? Anybody know who the Tetrim are? These refer to the Crusaders, the guys from Germany. From the time the Crusaders came, Baruch Misham, everyone ran away. Right? And from them they were killed by the sword. Who does he find? He finds two Jews. Rak Shnei Achim Tzvayim, they're two tanners there. The Jews were known for that skill in ancient Palestine in the Middle Ages. Karnim Hatzviyam and Amaishal, they buy the dye from the ruler. Valeim Yisasu Oid Minyanim Mispalim, and around them gather a small minion of Jews. The base of the Shabbosam in their house on Shabbos. Hina Zarazno Osam, we, inspired them, right? Umatsanu by Ischar, we found a destroyed house. Banai Bamudeh Shayish, that was built with pillars of marble. The Kippah Yafet has a nice canopy. V'lakachnu Oisoy the base Knesses, and we took it for a shul. That's how he describes, and he only spends a very brief time in Yerushalayim. But he builds a shul for the handful of Jews left in this ravaged country, in this ravaged city of Yerushalayim, a shul that we still use. I mean, it's an astonishing story. Over 750 years ago, 751 years ago, he builds this shul. And that's how he describes it. The building in Eretz Yisrael. But we really don't know. The country was, but then he also writes, where did I see that? He writes somewhere else, where did I put that? That this in fact is the fulfillment of, well, we all know, this chazal we all heard, that no other people will ever find permanence in Israel. That although we've been exiled, no one else will ever find root there, and no one else will be able to be settled there. And the Ramban sees the destruction of the land And even though the Mamluks had fought the Crusaders, and the Crusaders had fought back, and all these other things that happened in the land of Israel, there was no settlement there. And he saw the emptiness of the land, which the Ramban testifies to in the 13th century, as evidence of the fulfillment of this prophecy, that although we've been exiled, the land will remain empty for us, right? A land without a people, for a people without a land, right? That's what we said. So whatever they tell you. By the way, I don't. This is not a Zionist lecture or a Zionist history lecture. But if you go, forget the 13th century. Forget any Jewish source. Don't read any Jewish sources. Read the report of Christian pilgrims to Israel in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. Read their reports. They describe a land as empty as the Ramban. They all do. Mark Twain is the most famous one. Mark Twain went and he writes how they traveled and didn't see anybody. But read all the reports of all the Christian pilgrims. Great writers in the Christian world went to Palestine to visit the Holy Land and to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and to walk in the footsteps of Jesus and everything else. And they all come back and they all write the same story. There's nobody there. No one's around. The cities are all empty. The fields are all empty. There are no fields. There's no vegetation. That's how they all described it. You know, with the anyway, that's for another time. Okay, I'm going to skip the rest of this because we don't have a lot of time left. I'm going to go right to the Vikuchim, to the disputation. That's the last 2 pages on now, one of the pages I guess is in your binder, one of them is not. You see these 2 pages? There are large printed numbers there, 46, 47. Do you see a 46 and 47? Yes. Okay, and then there's a 48 and 49 on the next page? Yes. Okay, those are the 2 pages you should be focusing on now. This is the disputation. Okay, this is the famous story. Let's get ready for this. All right, now, okay. The other text, which I didn't get to, you can read on your own. Okay, I just want to get to the disputation. All right, what happens in the disputation? Okay, this is in 1263, July 20th to July 24th, in the year 1263. There's a Meshumid. Anyone here not know what a Meshumid is? Yeah. A Meshumid is an apostate, a Jew who embraced Christianity. His name is Pablo Cristiani. Just for a modern day depiction of a Meshumid, think of a Jewish kid in BDS. Same thing. Now, no, it's the same thing. How to escape the stigma of being Jewish. It's the same thing. I just thought I'd throw that in. I don't know why. Anyway, no, in every century, in every generation, there are different ways of escaping the stigma. When the definition of Judaism is mostly religious, you escape the stigma and the burden of Jewish particularism by joining the universal, the church, right? When the definition of being Jewish is the state of Israel, how do you convert out? You join independent Jewish voices. It's the same pathology. Now, this is why you shouldn't have a camera. Now, the disputation of Barcelona begins. There's this guy named Pablo Cristiani who's a Meshumid. Unfortunately, before he converted out, he actually learned. So he knows Gemara, the guy. And he knows it well. He's not an ignorant guy. The king is named King James I of Aragon. Nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. His name is King James I. That was just for Hoodie. King James I of Aragon. And Pablo Cristiani, the King James I, his priest, his father confessor, is Pablo Cristiani's superior. Pablo Cristiani is a guy who's going around preaching to the Jews, trying to get Jews to convert. Jews say no. Well, we're happy. They know, you can be happy. We're happy. And it doesn't work. So he's now going to force the Ramban to dispute him. And the Ramban, of course, the giant rabbi of his time, Pablo Cristiani, according to historians, thought that because the debate's going to take place in front of the king, the debate takes place in the king's court, surrounded by knights. There are knights there, right? Knights, and they're the highest members of the church. It's the entertainment. And it's a crowd of the elite of Barcelona and of Spain are gathered to watch this great debate between this Jewish scholar, this rabbi, who is not young. Remember, he's born in 1194, and now we're talking about 1263, right? He's how old is that? 70 years old. And he's an old man. And he's an old man. All right, he's not that old. In those days, that was old. I said, I'm 60, so okay, let's calm down here. Okay, so he's not a spring chicken. All right, so he's debating this guy Pablo Cristiani. Remember so it's a remarkably interesting vikuach because Pablo Cristiani. The purpose of the vikuach is basically three things. There are three questions they want to answer. Okay, number one, whether or not Mashiach had yet come. Number two, whether Mashiach is human or divine. And the third issue is, who had it right, the Jews or the Christians? All right, three simple questions. Did Mashiach come? Is he divine or human? And who has the right faith? And Pablo Cristiani presents a bunch of aganitas. Parts of the Talmud that are not rooted in law, that are more rooted in, like Midrash style, let's say. And to question, to challenge the Ramban. So I'm going to read you a text that's not, I'm going to get to the text that you have, but before that I'm going to read you two quick texts from the Vikuah that are said in the Vikuah. I mean, I could have printed the whole thing. I mean, it's not that long. It's a 4-day debate, but it all fits in this very small little book. It's not that long a debate. It's only, the whole thing is how many pages? 40 pages. But I just want to read you a couple of things before I get to what I handed you. One of the things he argued was that the rabbis accepted Jesus as the Messiah. Okay, so this is the Ramban's response. Does he mean to say that the sages of the Talmud believed in Jesus as the Messiah and believed that he is both human and divine as held by the Christians? However, it is well known that the incident of Jesus took place during the period of the Second Temple. He was born and killed prior to the destruction of the temple, while the sages of the Talmud, like Rabbi Kiva and his associates, followed this destruction. Those who compiled the Mishnah, it mentions them, lived many years after the destruction. All the more so Rav Ashi, who compiled the Talmud, lived 400 years after the destruction. If these sages believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and that his faith and religion were true, and if they wrote these things from which Friar Paul intends to prove this, then how did they remain in the Jewish faith? Now that's a pretty simple argument. I mean, because he was using agaditas from the Gemara to try to claim that the rabbis accepted Yahshua. Now, so he says, you're nuts, he says back to them. Now, one of the things the Ramban did that was very smart is Pablo Cristiani assumed that he would easily win the debate because the Ramban would not be able to say certain things because he couldn't insult Christianity in front of Christians. Ramban went to the king and said, I will debate Pablo Cristiani on one condition, complete freedom of speech. You have to guarantee me free speech. And the king guarantees the Ramban free speech. The king keeps his word. And the Ramban says things that no one in this room would have the guts to say to a priest. And the Ramban says them because he has a guarantee of free speech. So much so that when the church tries to file charges against the Ramban after the debate, the Ramban says, I got the king on my side. He said I could say whatever I wanted. And the court said, yeah, you're right. But he was still persecuted, and that's why he had to run away. But he's smart. He says, you give me free speech, I'll debate this guy. No problem. You can't punish me for anything I say. And they kept their word. The king kept his word. By the way, people forget, he said something fascinating. I don't know if I don't know if I finish on time, but after the debate is over, the king says, I have never seen such a more brilliant defense of an unjust cause. And he gave the Ramban 300 pieces of gold. He rewarded the Ramban. And the Shabbos after the debate, the king did something he had never done before. You know what the King James I of Aragon did? He went to Shul Shabbos morning. And he spoke to the Jews. It's an amazing story. The Ramban, he won a great court case. It's fantastic. Right? Better than Dershowitz. He knocked him off his feet, and everyone knows that he won the debate. And I mean, so much so that the king goes to Shul. The king walked into a shul. He had never walked into a shul before. The Jews were astonished. The king, can you imagine? Living in Spain in the 13th century, and in the synagogue, right, the great synagogue of Barcelona, the king walks in. It's an astonishing story. One of the other things that happened is okay. Listen to what Ramban said. This I didn't hand you. I'm just going to read it to you. In other words, well, they believe Jesus is God, right? So that's part of the debate that Messiah is not God, Messiah is man. So here's the Ramban. And that he comes from the living, unlike somewhat other Jewish sects say. Anyway, it seems most strange that the creator of heaven and earth, you're not going to believe what he had the chutzpah to say. Honestly, you read it today, you can't believe this. The creator of heaven and earth resorted to the womb of a certain Jewish lady, grew there for 9 months, was born as an infant, and afterwards grew up, and was betrayed into the hand of his enemy, sentenced to death, executed afterwards. He came back to life, returned to his original place. The mind of a Jew or any other person, says the Ramban, simply cannot tolerate these assertions. It's unbelievable. If you've listened all your life to the priests who have filled your brain and the marrow of your bones with this doctrine, and it has settled into you because of that accustomed habit, I would argue that if you were hearing these ideas for the first time, now as a grown adult, you never would have accepted them. Would anybody here tell this to a priest today? I mean, this is the Ramban. A small minority of Jews in Spain, in front of the king, in front of all the church authorities, got up and said what you're supposed to say. If you're not trying to win friends amongst Catholics. All right, now go to the text I showed you. I printed for you. Let's go to number 46. You see that? Okay. Then stop at the I will bring further proof that the time for the advent of the Messiah is past. I said, this is the Ramban, my Lord King, bear with me for a while. The essence of our judgment, truth and statute, does not depend upon the Messiah. For the purpose of fulfilling the commandments of the Torah, you are more beneficial to me than the Messiah. Right? In other words, the classic Jewish idea, Mashiach's not a big deal. You are king, he is a king. You are a Gentile king, he's a Jewish king. But for the Messiah, is but a king of flesh and blood like you. When I worship my Creator in your dominion, exiled from my homeland, suffering and under subjugation, the shame of the nations who taught me always, my reward is abundant. So the Ramban is trying to tell the king, you know, you're better for me than the Mashiach would be. Because I have to suffer as a minority Jew, be the target of your taunts, you know how much reward I'm going to get? Because I'm living amongst Gentiles that don't like me? If I lived under the Mashiach in Israel, it'd be easy to be a Jew. Now it's society, now it's tough. And this way I'm going to be rewarded all the more, he says. Right? Bring a whole offering to God for my physical being. Because of that I shall increasingly merit life in the world to come. However, when a king of Israel of my faith will rule over all the nations, and I have no choice but to abide by the law of the Jews, my reward will not be as abundant. Nevertheless, the vital conflict and difference between the Jews and the Christians concerns your contention about the principle of God, which is extremely unpalatable to the mind. This I just read to you anyway, from the other part. It comes to routine is not acceptable to rational mind. Nature, okay, so go skip down to where it says nature. In the middle of all that. Nature does not work that way, and the prophets never said so. Furthermore, a miracle cannot disseminate itself in that way, as I shall explain, etc. So the mind of any Jew or any man will not permit him to believe that the creator of heaven and earth, etc. Okay, that I read to you already. Condemned to death. Okay, at the end of that page, you voiced your opinion in vain and to no purpose. For this is the root of the controversy between us. Nevertheless, we shall speak about the Messiah in accordance with your wish. Okay, number 48. Inquired, do you yourself believe he has already come? I answered, no. I believe and know rather that he has not come. Besides the Nazarene, there has never been a person in the world who himself said or whom it was said that he is the Messiah. He didn't live in the 21st century. It is impossible for me to accept that he is the Messiah. For the prophet has said of the Messiah, he will have dominion from sea to sea and from river unto the ends of the earth. The Nazarene, though, had no dominion. During his life, he was persecuted by his enemies and was in hiding from them. In the end, he fell into their hands and was not able to help himself. How then could he help Israel? Even after his death, he had no dominion, for the might of Rome was not due to him. On the contrary, before the Romans believed in him, the city of Rome ruled over the greatest part of the world. But after they adopted his religion, they lost many kingdoms. At present, the worshippers of Muhammad have more dominion and more power than the Christians. Similarly, the prophet states that in the time of the Messiah, they shall teach no man every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the eternal, for they shall all know me. It is further stated, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the eternal, as the waters cover the sea. It is also said, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. In other words, the classic argument why Mashiach isn't here is because Mashiach didn't finish the job. from the days of the Nazarene until now, the entire world has been full of violence. Indeed, listen what he said to the king of Spain. The Christians spill more blood than the rest of the nations, and they also lead immoral lives. In other words, how can you tell me Mashiach has come and brought peace? You guys make more war than anybody else. How difficult would it be for you, my Lord King, in these your nights, if they would neither learn war anymore? The prophet further said about the Messiah, and he shall smite the land with the rod of his mouth. The rabbis of the book of God, which for all praise is holding, explains it. People will say to the king Messiah, the country has rebelled against you, and he will declare that the locusts come and lay it waste. They will say to him, the district has rebelled against you. He will say, let a horde of meeks peace. This did not occur with the Nazarene. As for you, his servant, despite your vows of belief in the Nazarene's elimination of war, you still considered habitation of weapons and mail-covered steeds. Yet at times all of this availeth nothing for you. I will yet bring you many proofs in the words of the prophet. Now, then the guy says, it's his constant habit to deliver such wing-winded speeches. Apparently people have been complaining about Rabbi's speeches for a very long time. Nevertheless, I have a question to ask. The king instructed me, be silent. He's the one who's talking. Thus I was silent. All right. But the point is the Ramban delivers without hesitation and with great courage the classic Jewish arguments against not why we rejected Jesus, but why we never accepted Jesus, which is a very important difference. We couldn't accept him because he didn't do what Mashiach is supposed to do. As we all know, no one gets the title until they do the job. And unless you bring world peace, security for the Jewish people, and universal monotheism, you're not the Mashiach. And he makes that very strong argument, also against the divinity of the Messiah, that Messiah we believe is a human being. The Rambam writes, I mean, in the Parish of Mashiach, Yamus v'yimlach banav tacht, that Messiah will die. And you know who's going to be king after him? His son. Right? He's a normal human being, Mashiach. And Mashiach is a normal Jewish king, and therefore of flesh and blood. And again, the very lack of accomplishment on Jesus' part is the greatest repudiation of his candidacy. But what is remarkable is not his arguments. The arguments are mostly old Jewish arguments that we all should know. What's remarkable is, of course, his courage and the arena in which he articulated them. And not only the courage, but it really is a remarkable story of people listening to reason, because the king accepts it. I mean, you're not going to get closer to any declaration of victory on the part of a Gentile in this kind of dispute than saying, and again, I'll repeat the words, I've never heard better arguments in defense of an unjust cause. I mean, that's what the king said at the end of the debate. And he goes in and he gives him 300 gold silver, and protects him, and he goes to Shul. I mean, the Ramban won. The Ramban won that debate. At the end of that debate, however, the church continued to try to pursue him, as I mentioned. They didn't let up on him. And whether it was the threat or actual attempts, we're not really sure. The Ramban had to run away to Israel, and that story I've already told you. And the one part of this I left out. I left out two major things. I left out one major thing from this discussion, which you can certainly complain about. I didn't discuss, as I mentioned, I wouldn't discuss the Ramban's Kabbalah, but also just to fill in one missing point. He writes a beautiful letter back to his family when he's in Israel. It's a beautiful letter, and it's worth reading. It's easily accessible. He talks about his pain of missing them, his pain of longing for them, his children, his family. He writes very, very movingly about how much he misses them all. And although he's in Israel and he's in a holy place and he wants to be there, his pain on his longing for his family is very stark. But it's a remarkable life. I mean, the Ramban, he will continue to be studied forever. And the Ramban Shul should be a place we all gather to rejoice the coming of Mashiach. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Poupko. Besides for tonight's Ramban, I also just want to publicly acknowledge and thank again Rabbi Poupko for his leadership and guidance. Last week on Monday night, when we were all instead of here, we were at his shul commemorating and memorializing the 11 who sacrificed their lives last week. So thank you for your guidance and leadership on that. Marv is right now 9 o'clock in shul. Next week we're going to switch the schedule. I'm going to be teaching next week the class that I should have been teaching tonight. And we're going to rework the schedule as we go along. But next week I'll be teaching 7:45. Look forward to seeing you all then. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Rabbi Poupko, again for sharing of your wisdom and your wit.
That's a great much.
Yeah, very interesting.